Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about compliments. Not compliments by, my, you look nice today, but compliments that come in sentences. We have objectives. We're going to be able to identify compliments in sentences. We're going to be able to fix common problems associated with sentence complements. Some terms we need to know. The direct object. Simple definition of that, the direct object usually gets the impact of the verb. Sometimes it receives the verb. And so you might want to write direct object down in your notes. You'll get a little bit better definition of it. And more importantly, you'll get examples of it. So that's what you want to know is the examples. Indirect object usually receives the direct object, like as a gift or something. Predicate nominative is equal to the subject. They equal each other. And object complements, similar, but they are names given to an object, a name given to a direct object. Okay, let's review by looking at what a sentence is. We talked about this before, so we should know it pretty well. Sentence begins with a capital letter and ends with a terminal punctuation mark, like a period, exclamation point, or question mark, but that's not all that a sentence needs. Has to have a blank and a blank. Pause if you need to. Okay, you remember. Has to have a subject and a verb or a subject and a simple predicate. It's got to have those two things. It also has to express a complete thought. The complete thought is the most important part. It's got to be complete. Okay, it's simple, but a lot of times what I read from students on things that they turn in says that sometimes we don't know what a complete sentence is. So make sure when you turn something in that you don't have any sentence fragments or run-on sentences. Okay, direct objects. We're going to look at those today. It receives the action of the verb. That's kind of hazy. Let's look at an example. It'll be a lot clearer. But don't write this part down. We have the subject, verbs, the direct object. That's how I remember it. I wouldn't write that down because it's not always that useful. The example that I'm going to give you right now I think is a little more useful. Ed writes a letter. Subject, Ed, verb, writes, letter is the DO, the direct object. It is receiving the writing. It's being written. Ed writes Amy regularly. Amy is now receiving that verb. She is getting the impact of it. She is now the DO, the direct object. So it can be a thing, it can be a person. Indirect objects, very similar. It usually receives the direct object as a gift. Obviously, you have to have a direct object in order for there to be an indirect object. Always remember that in case you have to identify them. The IO cannot be alone, and that makes sense. You got to have the direct action for the indirect action. Okay, again, don't write this down. The subject, verbs, the indirect object, the direct object. So doing the action gets the action, and this is the object that is being given to the indirect object. Okay, Ed writes Amy a letter. Now we have an IO and a DO. Or we could say Ed writes her a letter. Instead of a noun, Amy, we have a pronoun, her. Either way, it is still the IO. It is still the indirect object. Look for iodo. That means the IO comes before the DO. She gives him goosebumps. Now the gift being given is kind of weird, but it still is the same structure. This is still the IO, this is still the DO, the goosebumps. And you got to look for that word, iodo. If you have DOEO, if the DO comes first, then you have not identified them correctly. So here's a decoy. This is the same idea that we had before. Instead of Ed writes Amy a letter, Ed writes a letter to Amy. Looks like that's going to be the direct object, and that looks like it's the IO, but then we have DOEO if we do that, so it's not right. Letter is still the direct object in this, but Amy is something else. This word is a clue. Press pause if you need to. I'm curious to know what is Amy in this sentence. Remember, to is a clue. She is the object of the preposition to. To Amy is a prepositional phrase. So let's look at prepositional phrases. We talked about the prepared plane flew blank the storms. Anything that fits in that sentence is going to be a preposition. So into, toward, before, during, in spite of. This is a compound preposition. So in spite is actually a prepositional phrase in and of itself, and then it connects to the next prepositional phrase. So that helps to identify prepositions. This doesn't identify all of them. The object of the preposition is not the direct object, and it is not the indirect object. We're really tempted to identify it as the IO. It is not. It is an object of a preposition. Okay, so here are some for us to look at. The direct object and the indirect object, we use those instinctively and we use them correctly. We don't mess them up. So if you get hazy on what's the IO, what's the DO, no big deal. This is much more important because you need to know which one to use. So in this case, give me a break. We're going to use me instead of myself because myself is an action that I do to myself. Yourself, an action you do to yourself. Those are reflexive, and they can only be used that way. We normally use them properly, but there are times when we don't use them properly. We're going to see if we can catch ourselves later. So here, I see you. So I'm doing the action, you are receiving it, so you instead of yourself. He mailed himself a letter. He is doing it, and he is receiving it, so it goes that way. Okay, here, same as up here, what's the subject of this sentence? Give me it. Well, give is the verb. It's not the subject. The subject is you. You give me it, but it's a command. So what we do in English language is we take the you out and we say that it's understood. We start with the verb. What's me? Well, me is the IO. It is the DO. The indirect object getting the direct object. Again, they're both pronouns. Same here. Entertain us is going to be a entertain us is going. That's going to be a command. Understood you is the subject. Okay, let's practice a few to see if we know the rule. Toss me a pencil and an eraser. Find Amy and I a table. Okay, here is the problem with this one. Let's go back to it just this way. If we take out the other guy, in this case the other person, to use gender neutral language, we take out Amy and we have find I a table. And now we can see that that is wrong. So let's change it to the right one. Find me a table makes more sense. We can put Amy and back, find Amy and me a table. We have it so drilled into our heads. Maybe your mom always corrected you and said, no, Bob and I. I do that to people all the time. I correct people on that. But usually that's the subject of a sentence. When it is the object, it needs to be an object pronoun. Me is an object pronoun. I is a subject pronoun. So the rule there, take out the other person, and that will make the pronoun case clear. She sang a happy song. She sang us a happy song. So here we have a direct object. Here we have a direct object song. Same direct object down here, but in this case we added us to it. So indirect objects, again, they're optional, but you do have to have the DO in order to have an IO. She found the letter addressed to me. Okay, let's go back to that one. The phrase to me, that is a prepositional phrase. So me is the object of the preposition to. This is not the indirect object, and a lot of times we want to say that. We drove to the top of the hill. We have two prepositional phrases in this sentence. To the top is one. Top is the object of the preposition. Connects with the other one, and a lot of times prepositional phrases do that. Of the hill, and hill is the object of the preposition. There's no DO in here, and there's no IO. Okay, object complement is a noun or an adjective that describes or renames the direct object. Again, I'm going to tell you, with all sincerity, we don't usually mess these things up. And that's why we don't spend a lot of time on them. We have been using object complements all of our lives. Since we've been speaking, we just didn't know what they were. So today we get to learn what they are. But again, we don't have a lot of mistakes associated with them. They call the athlete a champion. Subject doing the verb to the direct object. And what's being done is naming. We are naming, calling, nominating, whatever it is. And so champion is the OC, the object complement, complementing the athlete. So here we look for the DOOC, and this guy are the same, or girl. Okay, they called the athlete invincible. It doesn't have to be a noun or a pronoun. It can be an adjective. Invincible is an adjective, and the direct object is receiving that title, that quality. Okay, let's see if we can identify a few of these. The press made him a villain. Subject, press. Verb, made. Him is going to be the direct object. Villain is going to be the object complement. She found him cold and unfeeling. She is the subject, found is the verb. Him, the direct object. Two complements, cold and unfeeling. They're both adjectives. They elected the candidate president. They, the subject, elected the verb. Candidate, the direct object. President is the object complement. We consider us fortunate. There's a problem with this. Okay, we is the subject, considers the verb, us is the direct object. Fortunate is the object complement. Did you find out what the problem is? If you said us is the problem, you're right. What should it be? Ourselves, because we is the subject doing the action to ourselves. We consider ourselves fortunate. Okay, predicate nominatives. There are more problems associated with predicate nominatives, so you need to know a little bit more about these. It is like an equal sign, not the predicate nominative, but the linking verb. The linking verb is an equal sign, whole lot like math. So Bob is the winner, Bob equals the winner. They are the same thing. So we could write it like a math sentence. But when we do that, when we change it around, let me go back a little bit. Subject, linking verb, predicate nominative. We can switch them. That's what I needed to say there. We can switch those around sometimes. The winner is Bob. Same idea as Bob is the winner. The winner is Bob. But now winner is the subject. Bob is the predicate nominative. So it does matter which one comes first. And in this case, the one that comes first is the subject. We can't always do that, by the way. Which pronoun should be used? And we do mess these up. This is where the problems come. That's why this is part of the SAT or PSAT prep, because we need to know where they're messed up. I was the winner. I is the subject. Was is the predicate nominative, it's not the predicate nominative. It's the linking verb. Winner is the predicate nominative. Okay, I equal the winner. The winner was I. That seems weird. It's kind of archaic. In our language, we're kind of drifting away from this construction. But sometimes you do need to know it. This is correct because we have a pronoun, sometimes called a nominative pronoun, that is being linked to the subject. So it really should be in the subject case or the nominative case. And now I is the predicate nominative. The winner was I. We're really tempted to say the winner was me. And in modern English, that is becoming more acceptable. I'm just saying there's not a hard and fast rule on that. You just need to be aware of it. So it's less formal, but it is correct. These are the subject pronouns, sometimes called the nominative pronouns. I, you, he, she, it, they. Okay, this one I'm just kidding. Unless you're from Texas, then I think it's for real. But we really want to make you plural sometimes. Well, you is already plural, but sometimes we want to emphasize it's plural when we say y'all. Okay, Amy and me were late. Now we have a problem. The problem, take out the other person, take out Amy and me were late. Well, the verb doesn't fit anyway. I were late sounds a little bit better, and that's because I is the subject of this sentence, and it does need to be a subject pronoun or a nominative pronoun. Amy and I were late. In that case, that is correct. I was late would be correct. Notice I did have to change the verb with that. Were doesn't work when I write it by itself. So the verb has to be conjugated, but still that trick works. Predicate adjectives. Okay, so the linking verb does not have to link the subject and a predicate nominative. It can also link it to an adjective, a lot like the object complements. They were the same thing. So again, there aren't a lot of mistakes that are associated with this, but we just want to know what they are. So Bob is victorious. Instead of Bob is the winner, Bob is victorious. Victorious is now the predicate adjective. So they are equated with each other. So he equals that. It's just like in math, but in math it's more like a thing and a thing, a 2 and a 2, or a 2 and a 1 plus 1. But in this case, we are linking parts of speech that are not alike. Bob is a noun. This is an adjective. So there's a difference there. And here, when we switch them around, the positions don't change. Before they did, now they don't. Victorious is still the predicate adjective, and Bob is still the subject. That's because the noun or the pronoun really needs to be the subject of a sentence. We don't really want an adjective to be a subject of a sentence, or at least I can't think of a case where that happens. Okay, to be is the granddaddy of all the linking verbs. So here, the equal sign is the linking verb. Is the most common form of to be. Here are the other forms of to be. If you're taking a foreign language like Spanish, French, you really need to know these. And the forms of to be always look way different from to be. They're totally different forms. Is, am, are, was, were, will be, has been, be, like a command, be on time. Those are all the linking verbs and forms of to be. There are other linking verbs that we can use. To be is just the granddaddy of them all. We also say to become, to seem, to grow, to appear, to turn. So I could say, I become sleepy. I seem contented. All of those things will work because all of those can be linking verbs, and there are more. The 5 senses can be used that way, and I like to use the example of cake, because when does cake not look good? The cake looks good. Not the cake is looking at us. It's not an action verb. It is a linking verb. The cake smells good, sounds good. When does cake not sound good? Tastes good, feels good. If you're like wrestling in it, I don't know what you're doing with your cake. That's your business. But all of those 5 sentences work, or 5 senses work as linking verbs as well. Let's practice. Let's see if we are using the right forms. I gave my marker a tap. What's the subject? I. What's the verb? Gave. Here's a harder one. What's marker? It's the IO. What's tap? It's the DO. I can't reach out and touch a tap. It's an abstract noun. It's intangible, but it is a noun. It is the direct object. She gave my colleagues and myself a recommendation. Here the problem is the pronoun case. So I don't know if myself is the right pronoun. I hear this a lot, by the way. What do we do to check it? We take out the other folks. We take out colleague and, I think I have an example of that. We got to take out my too. She gave me a recommendation. She gave myself a recommendation. Sounds really weird. Let's take out the other guy. This is what it's all about. This is why we're going over this, to know when to use what pronoun. This one's hard. Kind of hard. The pizza is here. Pizza is the subject. Is the linking verb. Here, it is not a predicate nominative, and it's not a predicate adjective either. It's actually just an adverb. And the only way to remember that is just to know that here is usually used as an adverb. We could switch this around and say here is the pizza. Pizza is still the subject, is still a linking verb, but that's still an adverb. That's a hard one. Too eager were the visitors. We have another inverted sentence here. What is the subject? It is not eager, because eager is an adjective. It's not the subject. Subject is visitors. Were is the linking verb. The predicate is a linking verb. And then eager again, that's right, it is a predicate adjective. He could feel the raindrops. Well, feel is going to be the linking verb. No, it's not, because the five senses verbs are not always linking verbs. In this case, feel is an action verb. So he is the subject, could feel is the verb, raindrops is that's right, the direct object. They are receiving the impact of the verb, which is could feel. These get a little confusing. But again, not really any problems associated with that. The problem is up there with my colleagues and. Okay, you know what? We're going to skip that one because I think there's an issue with it. There was Ed ready for a fight. Okay, so here we have, this is a hard one too. Ooh, this is a hard one. Okay, if we just look at this part, what's the subject? Ed. There is just like here. It is an adverb, and they kind of go together. They look the same, and they work together. So the subject is Ed, was is the linking verb. There is just an adverb. Ready for a fight is an adjective phrase describing Ed. So all of the things that we talked about don't really fit into that one, and that's why I threw that one in, because it is kind of defies everything that we've looked at so far. Okay, but one more thing we can do with this. We can switch it around. And we could begin with ready for a fight, comma, Ed was there. And now we have the subject coming in front of the verb, which is more conventional. We recognize it a little bit better. So sometimes it is useful to do that, to kind of switch the parts of the sentence around, and then we can see where the subject is and the verb. We can tell them a little bit better. Okay, did we meet our objectives for today? Yes, we did. Of course we did. We learned how to identify object complements. So that would be direct object, indirect object, predicate nominative, predicate adjective, object complements like giving somebody a name. So we learned all those different types. And we learned some of the problems associated with them. And those problems associated with them, they're mostly about the pronoun case. Use an I instead of me instead of I. Those are the problems associated with it. The rest of it is just kind of understanding the structure of our language. And that is useful when we have to find other issues. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.